Begin then. Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody to our South River City Council meeting this evening. It's November the 29th, 2022, and it's 6:03 PM. If you'll please rise and join me, well, I'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Councilman Halverson will give us prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Father who art in heaven, as we come before you this day, we're very thankful that we can gather here together as members of our community, and that we can discuss the needs of our city and the needs of our community. Father, we're thankful for the moisture which we've received, and we ask that it may continue, that we may have the water and the moisture in the ground that we need for our crops and our animals. Father, we're thankful for our freedoms and those who protect those freedoms. And we ask you to watch over and protect them, and that they will be able to return home to their families in safety. Again, we thank you for all we have, and we say thank you, my son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Okay, commissioners, thank you very much for joining us this night. We felt that if it would be good for us to have a joint meeting this evening, and we could talk about kind of our responsibilities as planning commission and city council. Hopefully when we leave here this night, we'll have a better understanding on what the roles that each of us play here in the city. And we're going to be led by our staff tonight, so I'm going to turn the time over to Dave, and he can take it from here.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a meeting that personally I've been looking forward to for quite a while. And trust the table is gonna this is a topic, this first item on the agenda about the development process that has come up in various settings over a number of months and over a lot of development projects. And so we're excited to be able to have everybody together to just talk through the development process, how city code is outlined and what it describes. We put together some material as staff in the packet that provides some base information, definitions that and terminology that is used in the development process that I think sometimes words that are said a lot, but we might not always know exactly what they're referring to. Many words like plat and plan get used interchangeably when they are different and distinct items. And so provided some definition there, as well as a table of information. We've talked about before the idea of knowing who approves or denies what and when. And so that table is kind of a summary of the research of city code on how it outlines the development process. I just want to kind of set the stage, and then Trevor's got a little bit of information and examples and things to kind of walk through to help us just have this dialogue. The goal really is to be able to review what our code says so that everybody understands the process, the roles and responsibilities, but also that we can say, is that the process that we want, right? It's city code, it's legislative. Ultimately, the city council can change that city code if you feel like the process needs to be different. Planning commission, of course, can recommend changes, and if they come across things and have over many examples and many projects, we want to be able to just talk through that. So we're not necessarily going to go over everything in the packet. That was background material for everybody. We want to make this more open. Our goal as staff is not to talk a whole lot, but to present a couple of things and then let the group talk as much as or as little as you'd like. So with that, I will hand it over to Trevor to work through some examples.
So before we jump into my presentation, is there any questions or comments from the reading material that you guys have initially? Clarifications or anything like that? Just want to make sure we're all starting at the same level. If you have any questions, let me know. Because I don't want to jump ahead and let somebody feel left out of that.
Are you talking about the packet?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the packet materials that are presented. Okay.
I think that's more up to you if you think that you need to do like a high level kind of overview of it.
Yeah. So, with my presentation, I'll do a little bit of an overview. Yeah, my goal is not to this isn't a lecture, this isn't a corrected thing. It's just, we want to all make sure that we're on the same page, because everybody at these tables plays a role in the development process, right? And so we all, I think it's helpful to know sometimes what the right hand does and what the left hand does, so that we know kind of how things are gonna function. So, Dave and I spent a lot of time crafting that matrix. I think it's really helpful to kind of just lay out those items. As we were talking, one thing that became really clear between the two of us is there's a lot of these phrases that we use, and sometimes I have a definition of that phrase, and Dave has a definition, and those don't always match. And that's one thing we're noticing. So as we're looking at the development process, we look at it in stages of development. I mean, sometimes we think of it as a chronological item, but it's really just a kind of a bucket that all needs to be completed in order to move to the next bucket, right? And as Dave and I were talking, that's kind of where our rubbing point was we were having these conversations of what's the preliminary plan, what's the preliminary plat, and what's the final plan and final plat, and where all of these things kind of just get jumbled and get confusing as you refer to them. So hopefully that's my goal, is kind of talk about it in buckets tonight, if that makes any sense. So I'm gonna have Lisa, we have a quick PowerPoint, so you're gonna have to turn around and see it for just a little bit. It's not super lengthy, so. Okay. So sometimes the development process feels like this in one way or another, right? Have you ever seen this brain teaser thing of which bucket fills first?
I always get it right.
I'm sure you did.
Every time.
So spoiler alert, the F is the last bucket that gets, or the first bucket that gets filled, right? But sometimes all of these different elements get confused of when they happen and who does what and when do they get filled, and sometimes as staff, this is kind of the process we go through for each bucket, and it gets a little confusing. So we understand why it's confusing for the general public when they hear about what's happening with the development. So our goal is more like, oh, Lisa, can you read quick on that? Yeah, could you put, yeah, there we go, perfect. So we're hoping to help you solidify that process and understand the stages of development, to understand what goes in each bucket. So what I like to visualize is this is the streamline of buckets that we have, right? Everything has to be done in the general planning bucket before we can go through concept and sketch. And everything has to be done in that sketch bucket before we can move to the preliminary stage. And so on till construction. So in the packet, we included general planning, concept, sketch, preliminary, and final, because there's some element of planning commission and city council involved in most of those processes. When it gets to the construction, that's where there's just a different set of requirements done that are all administrated by city officials. And so, but that also, before they can start construction, that bucket also needs to be filled. So, this kind of just helps me. I like to break it down sometimes because it can get a little hairy, and confusing.
You wanna
Click on it again, Lisa. All right, so, when we get a development, basically staff looks at which buckets are already filled and where we need to build the buckets from. That essentially, so when we get a request, we run it through the system and check to see what bucket is filled already, and then we can move on. If we're finding major roadblocks at the beginning, then we can line up the steps of what needs to happen. Majority of the time, the rest of the time today, we're gonna talk about filling in the bucket. And not necessarily about all the nitty gritty individual steps, although those are important, and I think it's important if you need clarification, or I feel like there needs to be clarification when we have those conversations, but there is one small caveat. So when we're talking about the development process, typically our brains are thinking it's the subdivision process. But there are items that don't necessarily need to be included in the subdivision process. They can be and will be in some instances, but there are some that don't necessarily have to go through the subdivision process.
When we say subdivision, the definition that we put in the packet, right, is the creation of building lots. Which is an important distinction, that you may have a parcel of land, but if it has not had a lot created, it is not yet buildable. And so subdivision can be one or multiple lots, but it's the creation of a buildable lot of land.
That's often the first place that we look, right? Is this land able to be built on? That's the first question we have. If it is not, because it's a parcel and it doesn't have a lot, or isn't a lot of record, which is another kind of more in-depth item, then we have to go through and create a subdivision. And there could be elements of the subdivision process that include these items that can be separate, but it doesn't necessarily always include them. So the items that can be separate, and I'm not saying that this is the best practice to have them be separate, I'm just saying that they can be a separate process. Is a rezone is separate from the subdivision process. Site plan can be separate from the subdivision process. The landscape plan can be separate from the subdivision process. And architectural review can be separate from those processes. Now, we have combined them into the subdivision process before as areas, but they are also separate things that also need to be finished before any construction happens. I see some, do you have any comments or concerns? Questions?
Green, no.
I see grins and head movement. I just want to make sure that we're good.
Sky green, but sure.
River, you watch so closely.
Well, I just want to make sure, this is the opportunity to have an open conversation and talk through it. So I welcome.
Well, so is that what we're doing right now? Because I thought we were listening to you kind of give this. So, no, I'm saying, I'm not, usually it's one of those, like, keep your comments till the end. So I didn't know if this is just, because like you said, I don't know if I agree that all of these should be separate.
I'm not saying they should be, I'm just saying they can be separate. And we'll talk about like differences and why they may end up being separate.
So we don't say anything now.
You can.
Okay.
I open the floor.
There's different circumstances, though, where sometimes it would be separate, and sometimes it wouldn't. But
Yeah.
one lot subdivision, we don't need to, and it means a rezone, it can all be kind of done in one clump, or you can just rezone it or whatever. It all depends on the proposal or what's coming before staff. Configuration.
I think that's part of what has created confusion in the past is one project has required a rezone and a subdivision and a site plan, and others has not required a rezone, but it has required a site plan.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's required, right? Every project is unique and different, and that's why I think, for me at least, the idea of thinking about buckets, or the idea of thinking about a different analogy, is like a combination walk. It doesn't matter if you go left to right to put the numbers in order. They just all have to be in order before you can unlock. And so many times the development process, the approval process, one thing might be in place. The landscape plan might have come through and there were no questions, and right from the beginning, everybody goes, yeah, we're good with that landscape plan. And now they're working on all these other things. Eventually, all of them have to be lined up to move on to final. But maybe that makes it worse rather than better. But for me, that's why stages of development rather than specific steps, it's not so much in order as these combination of items all have to be prepared and ready to go before we move on.
Yeah. So I kind of modified my original bucket and made it a few additional buckets that are on there, right? So these ones, in a straight up regular development process, subdivision process, then we would include all of the required elements, right? So if I'm coming in and doing a new commercial business process, my first question is, are the general planning bucket complete? Do we have the zoning and does it meet the general plan? Those are the two questions. If it does not, then if it does not have the rest of the needed zoning, then that's our first, oh, we need an additional bucket, right? We need that rezone bucket added onto this. And then so forth down the line. And so certain developments require different things. And that is absolutely what they were saying. I think that's where we're getting the confusion, is that, well, that one had a site plan and this one doesn't, it just has a plat. And why is that? Why can't we have a site plan on this? And we'll just talk through that as we go through. So is there any questions or comments about the buckets? Any more conversation around that development process? Because that, believe it or not, that is the last slide that I have. So I'm gonna leave it up there for your reference in the next little bit.
Are they 1 gallon or 5 gallon buckets?
It depends on the project, I think. Some projects require a 5 gallon bucket and some projects require a 1 gallon bucket. And so and some stages have different sizes buckets, right? In our process, the things that you guys don't see is the concept sketch section. That's a large bucket. There's a lot of checkpoints that they have to hit before they can move from that concept sketch into the preliminary stage. Does that make sense? And so, and what happens is if a developer comes in, they have the concept sketch stage with us. We've done the meeting, we've reviewed their documents, we've gotten all the necessary traffic study and things like that. Those all need to be complete before we will allow them to go to the next preliminary stage. So that blue arrow is city staff says, okay, we're on the preliminary stage. Our authority is done. Now the preliminary stage, their authority level lies with the planning commission. And then they have the authority that they have a handoff where, okay, the preliminary stage is all, we approve that whole plan. And now we have the final stage, and that's the city council's purview with this final plat and any other legislative documents that might need to accompany that. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Can I add one thing?
You got
For me, when I break it down, there's really only two things ultimately that get approved when you really think about it. There is a plat, which is, like we said previously, the creation of the property boundaries, right? That's the meets and bounds description of what the lots are going to be. That is approved by the city council. There's also the plan, the development plan, which includes a whole bunch of kind of sub-plans, the architectural plan, the landscape plan, site plan, the public improvements plan. There's a whole bunch of sub-plans, but ultimately there is a plan of what somebody wants to do with their property. And then there's the actual creation of the property lot boundaries. And those are ultimately the only two things from the 30,000 foot scale that actually go through an approval process. Those two elements is it. But because there's all these minor things, I say minor, but because there's all of these additional individual elements or components to the plan, I think that's where we've created confusion at times, where, you know, site plan, architectural plan, landscape plan, who's reviewing that? When are they approving it or denying it? Why is it not coming back a second time? We thought that it was preliminary versus final, right? Ultimately, there's one plan and there's one plat, and it goes through these stages, and it can change and morph until it actually is completed and finalized and approved to be built on. Don't like that. So for me, as I thought about it and realized, look, there's really only a plat and a plan. And as the legislative authority, the city council approves the final plat. And as the land use authority, the planning commission ultimately approves the plan. that was really helpful to me, to understand, oh, all these other things that happen are within one of those two categories.
So I brought a visual aid because the mayor inspired me.
Is that what that is?
Show and tell.
Is this like Miss Congeniality?
A little, no, I'm not gonna play that. But we'll see if this works. But ideally, when we have the system set up, we have the bucket set up, that when we start filling the buckets, they'll start being able to trickle down and fill all the other buckets.
Uh-oh.
You know those come in 2-liter bottles.
Let's do it, but not at Maverick.
We're all waiting to see if the first one.
Oh, my goodness.
Did you
so
practice
so
this?
good.
I did not practice it. That's
It's
why-
not, is
This
it
is
working?
a trial run.
Is it working?
It's working somewhat.
It's filling up that bottom platter real good.
Yeah, the platter.
You get that bottom side and then the middle.
Good.
Great.
So in your analogy, one is the platter.
The platter.
The mayor.
The platter.
Keeping it all contained, under control.
So it worked somewhat, but not for. We get where you're. You get it. I'm not gonna continue on. I'm just gonna put this down. Okay.
Now we're gonna. show.
Does anybody want to bring this? Okay.
It's gonna
Dave's
spill.
gonna talk about it.
Yep,
Eventually,
at some point.
All right. So what I kind of want to do is I have just 3 kind of examples, 3 case studies for us to look through. And what I want to do is let's talk about which buckets need to be filled, that was very southern of me, filled, and and which and kind of talk about the steps together. I think it'd be really helpful to have those conversations together, not just to have me preach you the entire time. So I'm gonna have Shaylee pass those out for us real quick. They're not super complex. I don't want to make them super complex. I think they're a good starting point for a conversation. Now, one thing, that's in the packet that we included, that matrix, that is taken right from code. That's each stage was listed in the code and what actions are happening in each stage. I think the one, as I was reading, the one that kind of caught me off guard from our general practices was in the final stage. That's where the planning commission approves the preliminary plan. Does anybody else find that different?
What did you just say?
In the final stage, the planning commission approves the preliminary plan.
Mhm.
Is anybody
Before
find
it
that a
goes
little weird?
to, yeah, like we're basically approving
Right.
that preliminary without ever giving it that second
Right,
approval.
so right
Yeah.
now, we're doing it all of the first meeting, right? We're doing the approval on the plan and everything at that meeting, and then the next one, we're just referring the final plat to the city council.
Can I ask like a bold question,
You bet.
pointed question? And I don't mean this rude, and I may feel alone, but I feel like this is like planning 101. Is this like new information to anybody here? Are you guys feeling that we are understanding the process to this degree?
No, not at all.
Am I the only one? I guess I won't put anybody else on the spot, but I'm just a little confused why we're going down such basicness.
That's on me.
Have we wandered off this path?
Yeah, like I feel like, are we
No.
this far off that we need
No,
to go
we're
back to
not.
these basics?
Just
No.
refresher.
This is a chance for the group to make sure we're all understanding the same things, because not everybody's at the same level.
Okay,
And I think many of the questions that have come have generated from the residents. And so in a public meeting, in a public sense, this is an opportunity to make sure that we are speaking very openly and candidly about the process and making it basic and hopefully eliminating the confusion. So if it looks basic and wait, I know that, that's the goal, is so that not only you know that, but then the public at large can understand it. Because I don't think it has felt that basic. It has felt confusing at times, based on the feedback that I've received. So maybe we're taking too much time, and that's part of it, but the goal really was to say, are we all understood? Are we all good? Are there friction points that we've had or frustrations at times that we want to address and bring up and work through and say, is it a process issue? Because we've been told as staff that it's a process issue. So that's why we want to outline process and then say, are those frustrations or friction points that we've had in the past truly process, or is it something?
Okay,
And I think too, on that same note, it's a chance for us to review that development process and see if we're okay with that. As the governing body and as the planning commission, as the advisory body, on all things land use, if we're reviewing our development process and we're having those friction points, well, I think this is the opportunity for us to talk about that, what changes need to be made if we're not happy with things and things like that. So I started basic because I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. I didn't want to dive too deep and get somebody out of loop and just sit there and I don't know what's going on anymore and just check out.
okay.
So, and maybe you want these later, I know.
I say we jump in.
One of my concerns is what Commissioner Wilkie brought up. And I only do it, and I think on the majority of the developments or proposals or whatever you want to call it, that come before us are fairly simple. We don't have huge developments in our city, but the ones that are controversial or more involved and have more public involvement on them, the only one that I struggle with, well, there's a couple, and she wrote up approval of the preliminary plat, and I'm okay with the planning commission approving that. But then you're also letting the developer go through a lot of process and spend a lot of money. If by the time it gets to city council, it's not gonna fly. And that's, go ahead, Gary, I mean.
No, I'm in agreement with you. You are the elected officials of the city. We're not. We're appointed. And I see us as a recommendation and advising, and so I've always kind of been confused why we are the approval body for that step. Because for us to approve it and have it not go to you, that just doesn't make sense to me as a citizen. I mean, I elected you to do all that. And I was appointed, we were appointed to kind of be a second set of eyes, to work with the staff and see if, if there are things, and we miss things. We do. I mean, but.
And that's exactly my point, maybe, I don't know, if anyone disagrees.
No,
And maybe there's a reason, maybe they're saying, here's the proper thing. I don't think it pertains to every one of them, and there's some basic, simple things that one lot subdivisions and those guys, but some of the ones we've dealt with in the last few years, I mean, obviously we bypassed some of that and did come to council for discussion items and things to see where we all were with them anyway. But if they're really going to approve it, and especially when it gets into, where was the other one? Was it the conditional use?
Conditional use permit.
Yeah, that's a recommendation though. And but there's the two that are approving. I don't know, I'm open, I just throw that out there for discussion. Where should it be?
Here, can I ask a question maybe as a follow-up? As you look at this chart, at least I've got it up on my sheet, there's really only a couple of items that are a legislative approval. Really a development process. After that general planning stage, right, making zoning and land use decisions, everything from there is administrative, right? It is making sure that the plan and the plat meets the city code. It's not a legislative decision anymore. And that's not unique to us. That's Ludlow, right? That's the state law of how that is established, that there are specific legislative actions. So when you talk about, the council's elected to make those decisions, a plat ultimately is an administrative decision. And so the council does by city code approve the final plat, but it's still an administrative decision at that point. And that's an important distinction between administrative and legislative. But I think that creates confusion at times. And that's my question is, does that create confusion when the council is asked to act administratively rather than legislatively.
Well, and I don't know if I can add it, what made it hard on previous developments is that obviously you have a developer that comes in that has the right to come before the council. And so if they feel like they're not making the headway or getting the response that they're wanting from the planning commission, I feel like the planning commission's being bypassed, they're coming to you, and that's why you guys, that's a friction point. That's where there then becomes a lot of discussion and proposed, like, hey, how do you feel about this? But it's really circumventing the process that it, and again, goes to code. They all kind of work together and tie together. Because if it doesn't fit our code, then that goes back to a code rewrite. That goes back to city council approval. If it does, well, then it's not going to be that hard for us to recommend because we really only have general plan and code. Those are our two tools that we can use for making recommendations or not making recommendations. Not personal feelings. It's not what we personally feel, you know, and then it gets to be up to you guys. Well, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. I'm not going to say we're perfect. Sometimes the emotions come across on certain things. But I think that's where it's kind of hard is that you do still have that kind of that third, I guess, body, the developer that. Can you tell them no? Like, sorry, that's outside our
If
process.
they always propose something that just fit in line with city code, right, then it's just go through the approval steps
Mhm.
and make sure it fits city code. But there's always, it seems like, a question outside of city code, right, that they're pushing or asking, whether that's the rezone itself or, you know, some other element of their plan for sure.
Yeah, but excuse me. I think one of the things that has kind of gotten out of phase, if you will, with the development process is there are very specific roles that go on. And one of them, and I think it's been undermined a little bit, and you can go onto the American Association of Planners and all of the different sites out there, they specifically talk about how important the Planning Commission is, not just as a body that checks the code. I mean, that's honestly what we pay you for. And if you need that much help, then, you know, we're really putting all our eggs in the wrong basket. And I'm not trying to say you, I'm just saying we've got code people that is their whole job 24/7, or 24/7, pretty close. You should live it out. We'll give you a little bit of time to go home, but you know what I mean? 8 hours a day. That's the stuff that, you know, Gary's a historian. And well, I wish I was a historian at the same time. He should never have your depth of knowledge on code. So if we're having things that are falling through on code because they weren't found or they weren't spotted, then we've got a process there that's not being really well taken care of. One of the things that the Planning Association specifically talks about the PC is that they, as the owner of the general plan, I mean, that should be, that's their Bible, is here's the general plan. As the owner of it, they should be the contact with the people. That if there's going to be something big, say like we've got a new change on all the roads, that should be where it should be presented out there and trying to get public comment. Or if we're going to be changing subdivision, or we're going to be changing rules or something on the process, it's the PC that actually makes the contact with the people and does the focus groups.
But yet again, on the general plan, you can change it and you approve it.
Yes, we do, but we're relying on y'all being the contact with the people because it's very specific. It's land use is what you guys are in charge of. And I mean, I honestly used to think that that's all city council did was land use. And yeah, I hardly see any of it. And that's why they have a specialized group that does that. And then the key point though, is that you're also the recommendation portion of every time one of these things come through. And like you said, hey, somebody's slipping around, or maybe we didn't get this right. When you guys see that and something didn't go right, you should immediately be going, okay, I would like to say, let's have the city council write some code on this to fill that hole that this developer just took advantage of. And then city can really get down, write the code, we pass it. And then yes, the rest of it is administrative. And that's the whole idea, is that your job should be administrative on passing everything off. But at the same time, what you guys do and add to the general plan, again, through recommendation, because it just gets passed up, y'all do the writing of it. The general plan is mainly written by you guys. All the changes and then it comes up, changes are requested, sent back, and you guys make the changes. So it's your wording. But I think the part of the PC that's being kind of diminished is their contact with the public, being the ones that know the public and know the general plan better than the rest of us. Our general plan is a little bit simple. Our code is missing a lot of details that we all wish we would have had. And I think that's the cycle that this has to rebuild is, okay, as soon as you see something wrong, send that up. Then we have to go in code committee and we'll hurry and write that thing and we'll pass it. Now we block that or put that hole or fix whatever issue there was. So when we talk buckets, I don't necessarily think it's the whole process of when somebody files what that's the problem, as much as the relationship between these two groups and how they synergize together on those kind of things. I could be wrong.
Well, and I want
Please.
to go back to one thing you said earlier about staff. I mean, you pay staff a lot of money and they do a good job.
They do.
And I rely on them heavily because I'm not a planner.
Mhm.
And, you know, some others on the commission, they have a little more experience in planning. They have more comments. They have a little more details. I mean, it probably looks like a meeting that I haven't read any. I don't understand how. But, you know, I really like what Trevor has done this last year, you know, giving us the summaries,
Mhm.
helping us understand, okay, here's what's coming before us. Here's what your authority is, and here are some things you should discuss.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
And Trevor has done a great job on that. He really has.
And I'm trying to figure out where I was going with this. I am honestly not sure where the friction is. I know there has been some, I felt it, but I don't know why. I almost think maybe it was personalities at one point. I don't know.
Are you sensing friction now?
No.
I mean, not in this meeting
No.
exactly, but I mean,
He should be.
no, I'm talking.
Glad you guys moved in.
Since last-
Last year, no.
I think Gary's point, there was.
There was.
And when he said, I think some of the PCs, planning commission, excuse me, authority was undermined in a way, and it was caused by certain developers or development that just said, I don't like what I'm hearing, and bypassed it. And I agree, it was controversial when it was going back and forth, and there was some undermine. I mean, I agree with.
When I hope that we're kind of getting into a spot where I feel like, so Trevor walked in after having multiple city planners come in and then here and then leave and then here, and then you've had to pick up and really kind of play catch up to what's been going on. And I think we've all kind of gone through some learning, growing pains as it would as a commission. And obviously we've got an opening and, you know, there's going to be a new member and there's going to be a new perspective, you know, but again, having these processes where it doesn't matter who sits in the planning commission role, who sits in the city council role, knowing, you know, whether it be through checklists, whether it be through, because there is a lot of stuff that comes to us that, you know, I do spend a lot of time when I get the packet, researching it. And if there's things that I don't understand, I do spend a lot of time because I want to understand and I want to really make sure that I'm coming up and making the most informed decision that I can. That takes a lot of time that obviously you're not going to see it up here. That's time at home, time from work, you know, just like you guys do. It's a service. It's something that we're trying to do for the community. But, and I do think I like having citizens input. I wish more citizens would show up and tell us what they think about certain things. But just like with city council meetings, sometimes it's just us and staff.
And
you
Paul.
know? And Paul, you know, who is our champion. He's on our staff.
But
So,
again, and this is my perspective.
Please.
My fellow commissioners may disagree with me. I think sometimes we try to be you. I mean, rather than being that administrative role.
But you're so tired.
Gary, this
Well,
pleases
no,
me.
okay, let
This
me-
pleases me.
Instead of being just an administrative role, because, you know, when I was chair, I mean, I checked with Trevor, you know, it's like, okay, this is an administrative, doesn't matter what I personally feel. I could think this is, you know, crap thrown against the wall, but if it meets code, we should approve it. And that's hard to do.
For sure.
And I think some on the commission, and myself included at times, you know, it's hard to do that. We look at things legislatively, that, oh, the mayor appointed me for my opinions, and well, to an extent within the code. And so I think it really is helpful, and I think this past commission, you know, we're getting more understanding of what really our role is. But what I like about these buckets you're proposing is, because plan, plat, where are we? I mean, if you could show me something and say, okay, here's the buckets, here's what we feel, this is what we're doing today, and you do that. That's been really helpful for me.
Well, and I know what Councilmember Dales was saying about LEDMA and the training, you know, there's been a lot, at least I felt, emphasis focused on training the commissioners to really understand our role. And I think what's hard is that obviously the, you know, planning commissioner role in a city like Layton, Clearfield, Ogden is very different than South Weaver, just because of the amount of, you know, proposals and developments and things that come through. So if it's not something you're doing consistently, it's, you know, sometimes it is oh wait, refresher. So checklist, knowing what's been done before, and again, conversations. I feel like we can all talk to each other. I mean, I hope you guys can call me anytime. You got my number.
You can't have more than.
Yeah, just no more than 3 at a time.
So I did want to say something on it. As the owner of the general plan, sorry. As the owner of
I'm
the,
next, okay?
oh, sorry, I didn't know you were going. As the owner of the general plan, what that means is that is your legislative portion, because what? Oh, you're supposed to have that recommendation of, yes, this meets the general plan, which means this is what the public actually wants. This is what that one little line really means. You're the translator for this specific development. And right now, I think that our general plan is pretty weak on description. I mean, it has some good stuff and we've come a long way, but at the same time, I don't think it gives you guys the tools to be able to do it. And as you are doing your job, that's where okay, we need to make an amendment to this section of the general plan, not the whole thing, one little section. Y'all would be the ones that would do that. You would say, okay, I'm seeing this need. I don't really understand whether people are upset about the density or the number of homes or that there's no trees there. Let's go talk to the people. Let's have a focus group. Let's bring up the question to it. And then add that to amendment to the general plan. Because if it's in the general plan, now that is something that you can use to control the development.
So I've said this in I don't know how many meetings. The general plan is guidelines. It's not law. I mean, it's our best thinking at the time, and it's a living document that changes. That's one thing that has frustrated me.
But the problem is it is law. And see, that's the thing,
It is a living document.
it is a living document, but that means that it can be changed, just like laws can be changed.
But
But-
it's not codified.
Yeah.
No, it's not codified.
It's not law, it's not code, it's not,
And
it states.
Like, I mean, we can't, for example, our general plan says that we have country charm. The planning commission can't look at a thing that meets code and say, well, it's lacking that country charm.
Because how do you
Our
define it?
our general plan
Exactly.
says
So then it comes down to, can you define it and putting that into the general plan?
don't
I mean-
think it's it has to be in code.
Well,
So
I
the-
kind of disagree, because if we look at the state statute, and I really wish Jamie was here now, and it talks about what the planning commission's role is, the first thing it says isn't in the approval process. The first thing it says is that it is the owner of the general plan, and that the general plan is what used to make all of these decisions
So
going
what I
forward.
understand it to be is that we
Kind
write
of, but
our
you
general
can't
plan
say, oh, sorry.
as a guideline, and we create the code to follow those guidelines, which is exactly what we've been trying to work on. But our general plan on its own is not codified.
Even our code says that the development has to meet the general plan. I think it does.
well,
Yeah,
But
the approval
again,
process-
like, you can't codify a general plan, because
Then our plan, you can't, others you can. Because it literally describes what can happen in the different areas, what the intent
that's
is
what
behind
we're-
each zone.
doing, like, how is our general plan, like, if our general plan is saying, okay, we want like larger lots or whatever, we have our residential areas, we codified that. Like, we didn't codify our entire general plan, we codified sections of our general plan to line up with our general plan. That's a lot of redundancy.
So if somebody comes in and says, I want to do industrial over here, and I want to do a nuclear facility. Y'all should be able to push back and go, you know what? that's not what we have as the general idea of what the vision of the city is by the people. That, yeah, we have an industrial area, but yeah, we're not talking about that kind of thing. That doesn't meet, because that doesn't meet with a residential, homey,
Or-
small town
You're
feel.
right, we can use that, but if we have someone else on the flip side come in with a great idea that we haven't even thought of, we can still go down that road, and that's. been
Technically,
one-
we can't because we have our uses. I mean, that's what our uses are for, and that's why they're codified.
So that's.
So we
what-
have our uses of, industrial, of like, hey, we allow these things, and technically, if somebody came in with a really great idea that didn't meet those uses, we still couldn't use it, and if they didn't meet their uses, they wouldn't get approved, because it's codified. And that is our law. That's why we have our uses.
If we are gonna treat the general plan that way, that's great, what it said in the general plan, it says, by nature, the general plan is a living document subject to revision and change with the intention to guide the planning efforts now and in the future. It's a guideline.
And
Or we have to change the way our general plan is worded.
And that's been one of my frustrations being on the planning commission, because a lot of the residents do see it as law. And it's not. And even though they had a ton of, I mean, most cities, their residents don't even know there is a general plan, let alone care about
Yeah, it's true.
it. Here it's different. And there was a lot of input, but I think there was a lot of misunderstanding of what that input would lead to.
Yeah.
And because it wasn't changing code, but the code committee and city council, and you've been working on that. General plan is a guiding document that changes, because if it never changed, I mean, the general plan of 1950, half of our homes would.
Not be
Not be
lawful.
But see,
yeah.
that's just it. We're not talking about it not ever changing. Actually, it's the other way around. If all it is just a pamphlet that you look at, kind of like a magazine going, oh yeah, this would be cute, and this is what people want to see us in 10, 15 years, then yeah, we could just put it aside and never use it. But it has to be amended. And that's why I guess I'm kind of being confused on the word law.
Can I bring up something that might maybe bridge the gap a little bit? I've seen a lot of cities when a developer brings in a plan that doesn't meet the general plan specifications, actually file or apply for an amendment to the general plan. Kind of like a rezone request goes along with the development plan, and ultimately you are adopting an ordinance to change the zoning, right? A legislative act. I have seen some cities that will have the general plan change go along with the development, so that the city is acknowledging this is outside of our current general plan, but we like it. So we're going to amend the general plan, to your point. There's an actual amendment rather than just it's sitting on the shelf, we refer to it. It's an option to consider. Another thing that we don't do that is in line with the same concept is there have been times where a developer would like to do something maybe a little bit different than the land use directs, or their project needs a little bit different code language, or they would like to request a little bit different code language. Other cities, and we even have an application for this, it just has not been part of the standard process, is a developer will submit a code change request along with their development, right? So that the council could say, yes, we recognize this requires a code change, but we like the development, we would like to make it happen, but we need to legislate the ability to make it happen rather than just shut it down because it's not in the code, even though we like it.
Right.
And I think as a commission, I mean, we didn't just write the general plan and put it on the shelf. I mean, we refer to it constantly.
I do.
And, you know, and there's been times when, you know, we have had something back that it was like within a couple of months of the plan being approved. Somebody came in with something and, you know, oh yeah, we like this. And it's like, I'm not gonna go against this. We just, you know, lost blood, you know. putting the thing together. This is against it.
I am a victim of
I'm
hate
not
crime.
for it. And so I hope you don't think we're ignoring it, because we're not.
Mm.
But I think the perception that it is a binding document is not accurate.
I have two questions. No. Here you go.
The record.
But I did call for it first, so go for it, Petty.
I know that. I want to address what Dave said really quick. So with the general plan amendment and the code change request, if a developer comes forward and asks for, if we implement this and they ask for that, it's just a quick clarification. It's amending the general plan entirely for whatever that section is. And the code change say that with parking, I just threw that out. If our parking says they need 15 spots and they're requesting that they only have to have 12, if they're requesting a code change, they're requesting that for that whole zoning, code for that zone, correct?
Yes,
So,
any code text
any-
change would apply to any future development within that zone, not
Okay.
just their own development.
Can I give you a really good example of this? The RV park did this. The RV park came in and amended our code that would better fit the short term or the tiny homes. That was amended for that recreational zone. And then we had to go in and change the code again because we decided we didn't like that. So that,
And I'm okay with doing that example with the code. But to amend the general plan, when you look at the requirements of actually amending the general plan
Public hearing.
and the public hearings and the steps of that take, I don't know that I'm okay with that.
I've got some bruises still.
And again, thinking of,
Yeah.
Pandora.
it hasn't
Yeah.
happened. It hasn't happened. So it's great that there is a way, but in the history of South Weaver, has that ever happened? Have we ever had a developer come in with an amendment to the general plan or an amendment to the code? Because I think for the
an
most
amendment
part-
to the code, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
covariances and things like that, but I think it's because we've realized, and when we're going back and rewriting so many sections of our code, we've had a lot of holes, we've had a lot of weak spots, and I think we're trying to toughen up and give it the teeth. Because again, in a perfect world, planning commission, general plan, city code. It checks the boxes, it fits, it matches what the vision is, it matches what our code states, perfect, we recommend for approval. It's not personal, it's not, but it's not that, because again, we are having to fix those weak spots and those, areas within the code, maybe even areas within the general plan. And that's something I know Commissioner Davis, who's not here, and I'm not trying to speak for him, but in our last planning commission meeting had said, what is a proactive, step that we can take as a planning commission to maybe be getting ahead of some of these potential issues or these weak spots? Because I think sometimes we have these meetings, we had one meeting where we talked about the same thing, 3 meetings in a row. Was that efficient? Probably not. Could it have been done in an email? We want to make sure that we're using our time wisely here, because, we don't have new development plans and proposals and, things for consideration coming in every single meeting. But put us to use for the things that we can control.
Carrie, I see you trying to speak. I'm gonna go first, okay? I have 2 questions. I'm gonna ask you the first one, and I want you to see if you can just answer it in a yes or no for me. If the PC has a rezone come to them, I just made up another question. Okay, if the PC has a rezone come to them, is that a legislative action?
Yeah,
Okay, if the PC has a rezone come to them and it does not fit the general plan, sorry, it does fit the general plan, can they still say no?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
However, I will say, the planning commission is not making the
I know that.
decision.
I understand that. I'm just saying,
The recommendation.
it is a legislative decision of the planning commission, and one of the few. I mean, no, not a decision, recommendation, one of the very few legislative recommendations they can make, correct?
And that goes to Joel's point of, that's why a public hearing.
Yes, I
for a
understand that.
rezone happens.
That's correct. Got it. Great. Okay, my second question. We discussed, I want to go clear back to Blair over here because I feel like what he brought up at the beginning is actually something that we are all struggling with and something that needs to be addressed. And that is that preliminary approval that the developer is putting in a lot of money towards, only to get to council and be like, mm-mm. So Trevor, we spoke, I think in code or something about reorganizing the structure of that planning process. And that's not necessarily talking about the different buckets. That's actually delving into that particular bucket of preliminary plan. Can we look into that tonight and talk about how we can restructure that to avoid the
That really
friction
is
that
the
we
only
get?
spot that we've had the contention.
That's where it is.
Don't you agree?
I completely agree. And so I feel like this, we're delving off into the weeds And let's just zone in on where we see the biggest problem.
Yeah, I was hoping to get back to that. So, state code with administrative action basically says somebody's got to approve it. For the most part, right? Especially for final subdivision plat, it's somebody's got to approve it, whether that's staff, planning commission, or city council. In our code, we've set up that the city council approves the final subdivision plat. But in our code, we have it set up as the preliminary subdivision plat is approved by the planning commission. And so there's that check and balance at that point, and I understand that the concern of, well, if they give a preliminary plat approval, then they're gonna spend a whole lot of money to get a final plat and then be told no. And that's almost a risk for the developer and not necessarily one that we have ceiling gain, however, I understand that.
Can I add to that, though? It is a risk for the developer, and it is a lot of money, and I didn't mean to just leave it at that, but it's also the city spending a ton of money
Exactly.
and time.
And
When you consider
resources.
our city engineer, your time, Dave's time, the mayor's time, planning commission's time. If it's all for naught, if that's what's gonna happen. I mean,
So-
that's the only, and again, it's not every subdivision, it's the ones that.
Yeah.
Some.
So we had talked about just reorganizing when the the site plan review. Where the planning commission can actually give some feedback before he gets before he's going to preliminary approval. So the first time you guys see it is not at preliminary approval, but you're actually able to step in a little bit earlier into the game and say, hey, like this orientation or whatever, all of those things that we like to give at preliminary. And then they're like, gosh, I just spent $30,000 in engineering. I don't want to just switch it. Like, can we just move that?
So right now, in that list that we had in the packet, that's how our code is right now. And so what Haley's talking about is, right now, our process is when they submit a preliminary plan, the staff reviews that preliminary plan, sometimes 2 or 3 times with the developer. We talk about the site plans, we talk about the lighting plan, the landscape plan with them in those reviews. Those approvals, if you look at the chart, those approvals all lie with the planning commission. But we're spending a lot of time with staff kind of getting that plan ready, right? And so by the time it gets to the planning commission for their preliminary plan approval, which has been happening just at their first preliminary meeting. We've done a lot of legwork, and so the planning commission has a time spell. Well, there's nothing really for us to say anymore because staff's done everything and we can't really do anything, so we just have to rubber stamp it. Well, the planning commission is their land use authority, and our code is set up to actually, they at the first meeting, they give a preliminary plat approval. And what that is saying, in general, the layout that you have here works, but you don't have a final approval to go build. Yeah, in general, this works. Now, if there's a site plan that's required, an architectural plan that's required, typically these are going to be commercial or multifamily development. Our code is set up that actually at the end of the preliminary stage into the final stage, planning commission says, we've looked at the whole preliminary plan. It's complete. It fits all the conditions we set at the preliminary plat approval. And we approve this plan. And then we recommend the approval of the final subdivision plat to the city council. Or conversely, they could say, we don't approve the plan and we don't recommend final subdivision plat. And then, and we're kind of, the site plan and all of that is not approved, and then they're kind of stuck at that point. But the final subdivision plat always the city council's, that's their, so that's, it allows the planning commission to get those site plans a little bit earlier to influence the, hey, that road, can we work on where that road is at? Can we work on where those sidewalks are at? So that you have, the planning commission can actually plan and not react. Does that make sense? And so then they're wrapping up that plan together and saying, yes, this meets all of our conditions, we feel comfortable with that final subdivision plat to the city council. So that's how the recommendation, according according to the code. Now, if we don't like that, that's the ability to change that. And it's just one thought process about administrative items with the city council. A lot of cities are trying to limit how many administrative items can come to the city council because it puts the city council kind of in a hard position. Because if it meets code, then we have to approve it, right? So if there's public clamor about the development, because we don't like it, and the city council has to approve it because it meets the code, it becomes a disconnect. So some cities are moving away from having the council approve final subdivision plat, or having the planning commission or staff approve that final subdivision plat. I'm not saying that's the perfect way to do it. I'm
My
saying-
2 cents on that is it's really easy to educate the public.
Mhm.
I mean, we do it all the time, but I know you don't like this. I don't like this. It meets code. It sucks for all of us. You know, I don't know that I'm willing to be like, hey, that's kind of hard, so don't come to me for that.
And that's really what happened with the development you're talking about, right? You know, it didn't matter what the general plan said.
Yeah.
In that code,
Right.
so.
So how do you guys feel about reorganizing the procedures so that you're seeing a little bit earlier from preliminary?
Well, I would like to see the details. I would like to see what, the steps that have been taken and the things that have been done. Because I do think for the few that have come through during the time that I've been on the commission, and it's not as long as, other members, is that I feel like there's been gaps. I feel like there's some holes, and I feel like there's been a big question mark on certain things. And I, yes, have an opinion, but sometimes that opinion is only based on 80% of the information. So you're getting an 80% response. It would be nice to know that I've got all the details in front of me, so I can be making that recommendation, knowing I'm fully supported by general plan, I'm fully supported by the code as it's currently written. And, obviously it sounded like there's a lot of things that if there are changes to be made, it's a code change, in terms of a procedure and how things go through the approval process. I mean, you guys as staff spend a lot of time with these developers, meeting with them, going through the checks, going through and making sure that things, meet their list. We don't, we get them for one meeting for the 20 minutes that they come in and then they take off. I would like to change the meeting requirements, that if they show up, they're on the agenda, they stay the whole time. I think it's rude when they get up and they leave. I was just like, well, all right, I guess we heard what you had to say.
I'll stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody should stay.
If Paul can stay, everybody can stay.
So,
When I first started with the city, the practice was a proposal came forward, an application came forward, staff review it and write their memo to the planning commission that said, we've reviewed this. If XYZ changed on their plan, then we would recommend the planning commission approves it or recommends approval to the council. And there was frustration expressed at the time about an incomplete plan, that it was too preliminary. It was very conceptual and it wasn't detailed enough. And so the practice shifted that the application came in, staff reviewed it. The staff would write their memo to the developer and say, these are all the problems with your development. It doesn't meet code in these areas. And essentially, that's, I think, the moment when the planning commission lost their, or it was taken away from them, of their ability to actually plan and say, these are the concerns we have about layout or design or whatnot. But now, that's why Trevor says that sometimes 3 or 4 times we've gone through from a staff perspective.
And the only thing I would think, and this is a personal thing maybe, is knowing that background. I mean, I was involved when we got those letters and we got we even were getting them on the city council with the same thing, and some of those plans were incomplete. And we wanted them changed before they got to that point, because it was obvious, easy changes. But to give some of that background to planning commission or to whatever stage it's in, they can review it, they can see that it helps Gary educate on what was fixed, what was changed, what have they gone through everything, just so that you're knowing you did your due diligence on the rest of the project. So I mean, I don't know if that's what you would want to see, but I always like seeing Brandon gave them this list and they did all this stuff. And just giving that as part of their packet or their homework, if you want to deal with it that way. But I like seeing that kind of stuff, but I like the change, because I think staff has done a much, much better job since you've been here, Dave, because there was a lack of review and correction from sketch plan to that preliminary. I mean, some of them were still in sketch plan stage when they hit planning commission.
So would it, from a procedure and a process standpoint, this does not require a code rewrite. Our code would allow this already. Essentially, kind of marry both of those, that, and Trevor said this to me before, that if staff receives an application, a preliminary application, gives one review to the applicant and writes their memo to the applicant and says, here's your code things, you need to fix that. Then if there's a second submission, rather than get into that cycle that we've had on a few projects where it's like, nope, issues, nope, resubmission required. So on the second submission, give that to planning commission
With the memo.
with the memo of the kind of the original concept. Here's the, staff's initial changes, but then get planning commission involved early and upfront. And let them at that point have a go. And really at that stage, it is still probably very preliminary. And it could still require a lot of changes. And in the packet, the statement in the preliminary stage is review and provide feedback on elements of the plan, including site plan, architectural design, landscape plan, and lighting plan. And that's in that preliminary stage. That would happen in that first planning commission meeting of
Right.
recognition that this is not a done deal.
Right.
This is still preliminary in its design and its
And
concept.
that's a section of code that's always frustrated me, because I feel like we've missed it so many times. And I know that
We've asked.
I'm not
It's just
blaming,
never been provided. And
Right.
Again, not by staff, it's the developer is not doing their
right, to
job.
go in and see that you
even
guys
coming
have the
forward.
ability to weigh in on that, but you're actually missing that ability, because by the time it gets to preliminary, it's already kind of a done deal. So like, I want to, like, can I just give you an example of what I feel like, and I'm, again, not trying to like blame or anybody, but like, for example, there was a development recently in the last year where there was a situation with the buffer fence, and staff gave some suggestions about how to set up the fencing, the barrier there. But it never went to planning commission, that suggestion. That's what the developer brought forward. And so when it came to council, that's when I learned that it was like, oh, well, staff thought that would be a good idea. And that made me a little nervous, because I'm like, well, I don't think that that's staff's position to be able to offer suggestions. That's our planning commission. And it's even in the code that the planning commission has that jurisdiction, but they actually never got it. And I'm not saying that it was a matter of like, well, you guys withheld that, but it happened in those meetings that the planning commission wasn't a part of yet. So as a city council member, knowing that the planning commission has that jurisdiction, but didn't really quite get the way to weigh in on it, made me a little uncomfortable, because I kind of want to say, well, planning commission, if you did know that, how do you feel about it now? So that's one of the reasons why I feel like it would be beneficial. And then, of course, the architectural review and things that we've had issues with, that they haven't had the opportunity to weigh in on. And I mean, it's like, it's 50-50, because you may have half the planning commission wanting one thing and wanting another, and you guys are just gonna go around and around, but.
That comes to my question, because again, when Trevor says this is an administrative item, that need code. I take it very literally. I mean, I try not to weigh into other things because of that. Now, if you're telling us we have a little more, a larger voice to weigh in on things, I think that may change, for some, and may not for others.
I already go on the side of having a larger voice, so.
But I think at least some clarification, or maybe it's just re-education for me specifically of what exactly does it mean when, you need to review this against the code, because I'm very black and white with that. And I'm open to staff suggestions.
Yeah,
To that, going to their example though, I mean, in that request, it was a variance from code.
no, it wasn't a variance.
Well, it was.
They were
Yeah, 'cause
asking for
we
a
changed
different
the
option.
buffer.
Yeah,
We
the buffer.
changed that buffer to a wall.
Right, but the planning commission in the code has the ability.
Has the ability, and that's what I'm saying. So you already had that ability to say, yes, that seems acceptable, or no, it doesn't, or hammer it out between you guys. Because, but, you know, we talked through it, and it was more of a headlight issue than it was anything. Or whatever, I'm just saying, I think you should have that leeway to make those type of recommendations. I mean, I don't know how far it goes, it's a gray line, but I think there's a lot of gray lines in all of this too.
That's why there's supposed to be 5 of us.
That is why, that is.
Yeah.
why it's
That's
why
the 2 of us bearing the brunt of it.
Yeah,
So I will say there are sections of the code, like the buffer yard is one that the bond recommendation of the planning commission to the city council approval, right? That's the buffer yard limit. However, when we get to site plan or architectural design or landscape, that
It is rare that you have that.
it is
Very rare.
your discretion, right? I mean, we can't request things arbitrarily that's outside of the code. But when whatever buffers or boundaries are set within the code, that's what you have the discretion on, right? So when you're looking at site plan and you're, well, I have a concern here, you have the ability to comment on that concern. And I think getting that to you sooner in that process before the developer spent 40,000 on engineering fees, right? Before they've done their 4th redesign on the site plan, you get an opportunity to say, these are the things that I'm concerned about on the site plan. These are the things that I'm concerned about on the architectural review and things like that.
And from a development standpoint, giving us at least something to look, that's been one of my biggest frustrations is when we have had stuff that's been incomplete. Because I'm like, how am I supposed to give you an opinion on something that, again, is incomplete? I don't know how I feel about it, because I don't know what it's actually going to turn to. And probably with the same development that Councilmember Alberts was talking about, the fact that we had a commercial and a residential.
Okay, I'm
component.
councilwoman. I think you
Councilwoman.
just called me councilman.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Technically, it's member,
I take it back.
and it says on, you're a council member.
I put this up I put this up just for you, so you want to forget my
Yeah,
name.
it's a councilmember.
Sorry,
Albert.
Julie. Sorry,
Maybe
Commissioner
because I said
Losi.
it so fast.
Just kidding.
No, but how, that was a frustration and that was a friction point for me, where I kind of felt like our hands got tied. When it came to the architectural approval for the one thing that we can actually weigh in on, which was the commercial. And because approval had already been given at city council level, which you guys, we really kind of went back and we checked a box, but we couldn't really force the developer to do anything. And in my mind, that was very frustrating because I am really not looking forward to when it actually starts getting built, seeing what happens. Because I don't think we're gonna be happy with it.
Well, and we've talked about that before, that there shouldn't be anything that goes to the PC or to the CC that is incomplete,
Yeah.
period. I mean, it shouldn't even, most cities say you have 2 weeks leeway between it, and if you don't get it on that one, you go to the next planning commission meeting.
And I
There's
kind of feel
no
like maybe that's
messing
for
around.
us to be like, sorry, this isn't complete, we're not even gonna discuss it, and taking it back.
It should
Like
have been on the
meeting it, and
agenda.
that's great, and I'll admit it's been a learning curve. You know, it's not like I went and got a degree on how to be a planning commissioner. Yeah.
Can I ask a very specific question? I presented a procedure, a practice of staff doing one review, writing the memo to the developer, and then on second submit the memo to the planning commission. The other option, or another option, is on the initial submission, going back to what we did before and writing a memo directly to the planning commission. Which do you prefer?
Can I add one more detail to that for you? So.
To which
with that
one?
preliminary
Option
bucket,
1 or 2?
We're back to the-
inflexible.
Oh, okay.
With that bucket that we're talking about, there's items like, receiving letters from all of the, utilities, right, and, providers in that preliminary bucket. We have to receive those before they can get out of the preliminary bucket. So if we were to do the one review and you review the preliminary plat at the beginning, but the rest of the plan isn't approved until the end of that bucket, then we may have instances where our memo is, we need to receive these utility letters and these items that are still outstanding
Mhm.
on it. So there could be some gap. Now, if we wanted to have that complete, then it's kind of going back to that.
that goes back to your comment, if you're not comfortable with those not being in there, then it shouldn't even come before them.
Because I think the biggest thing with the, letters of commitment from the utilities, do we have water? I mean, that's a big discussion topic right now is, do we even have the water shares and the water rights and the access available? And without having those letters of serviceability, should we even be having this discussion? So I think it's important, and at least knowing that the letters have been requested. I don't know what goes into the process of getting a letter from the utility company. I don't think that's something we need to know. It's just a matter of, do we have the commitment or not?
I think what's happened in the past is the planning commission has made their approval or their recommendation contingent upon all
Getting-
of those staff memo items completed. Again, the idea of stages is important.
Yeah.
And as you think about it from a developer standpoint, they want to come to a public body as quickly as they can and be told it's worth it for you to start down this path and engineer this whole thing. And that's why that initial plat decision, right, separate from the plan, but that initial plat decision of, if you configure your lot like this, we're generally okay with that, right? Not that it's final, but we're generally okay with that. Go work on the details. I think that's what a developer wants very quickly. They definitely feel like if they get a preliminary approval that they're gonna, go through the rest of the process quickly and get to a final, but that's not necessarily the case.
It all depends on what we're considering preliminary.
Yep.
And so, and Dave, to answer your specific question, from my opinion is, that's almost a decision you guys have to make, if that second rendition comes back and you still have 2 pages of things for them to do. That's a waste of time to bring in.
It's almost like there should be like a percentage that
Yeah.
they have to meet before it comes, because I agree, I mean, if they come to us with, 4 pages of things, I'm like, well, you're just trying to rush us through. That's
Yeah,
what you're doing. Yeah.
Why are we talking tonight?
And you're hoping that we'll miss something in our,
Review.
not
Checklist.
Yeah.
checklist, or whenever we make a.
Recommendation. Well, and
whatever.
you've
But
seen how hard
that
it
will
is.
miss something.
Yeah.
that They can say, oh, well, that wasn't in the minute.
Yeah, we forgot to make a recommendation. We
Right.
forgot to have a condition attached that needed to be, and then there's a lot of times too that I feel like we have had conditions attached that didn't get followed up on. And then all of a sudden we go back and like, wait a minute, didn't we discuss this? What happened? What, why wasn't this addressed? And that's where it becomes hard, is keeping track of all of the things. Like if we're literally, okay, we've got 20 conditions attached to an approval, should we have even been approving it or recommending it for approval at that?
Motion with that many
No.
announcements is hard and shouldn't happen.
We didn't really answer your question, because it really still needs to be up to you guys. And
What do you
still
want me
make
to
it-
do
I mean,
now?
I've said a couple times, why do you guys even bring this to it? I mean, I've said it, but there's other times when it's been totally complete. But I think it still needs to be up to you, but I just think the background of all those changes may be educational for that.
I hope you see the dilemma.
I do,
Because
totally.
we're being told, we want planning commission to see this as early as possible so that they can fulfill their role.
But they don't have to approve it at that point. in
Right.
time either. That's what- and I-
Yeah.
But, well, they don't want it if it's incomplete either.
Well,
That's the
It's a
delay.
preliminary,
So,
right?
okay,
You guys don't want a
let's
preliminary.
get back to sketch plan then, so. If I am correct, my two's back here, there used to be someone from planning commission sitting in on the sketch plan meetings. Or at least be partly involved in that.
No.
But they're not now, correct?
No.
No, they haven't been.
I mean, and whether they want to be or we want to change that, I mean,
But can I clarify something real quick?
It is or requires.
yeah, exactly.
Just a point of clarification. I think what they're saying is the sketch plan is not necessarily needs to be complete. It's, if you have the sketch plan, they can have a discussion, but when preliminary comes, they don't want to have a list of 40 things that still needs to get
Still
done.
need to be done.
That's
She's talking about getting it before preliminary with these guys.
Okay, so that's where I think the bucket conversation is important, because when, basically what staff is doing, when we do all our reviews, is we review that whole sketch plan. If you look in our code, it's like 20 checklist items. We have to look at the traffic study, we have to look at everything in that sketch plan. So really what's happening on staff side is they may submit a preliminary application, but we're not letting them proceed into that preliminary stage until they've wrapped up all of their sketch plan stage completely. So then it's the preliminary stage. So the planning commission can see the development after we hand it off. It could be a handoff in that meeting, right? Where we reviewed these in sketch plan. This is now your baby. Here's the preliminary view of this whole bucket. And you're not approving anything at that night, or you can approve the plat if you feel comfortable with approving the plat, but the rest of the whole plan doesn't get handed off until that final stage where you're saying, okay, this is a complete plan. Now, city council, we're handing the final stage off to you. Does that make sense? So you can see, we will make sure that we say, these are the things that are still missing at that very first preliminary meeting. But we're not saying approve it now with all these conditions. We're saying, what other conditions do you have on top of what we said? And then in that handoff, you can say, yeah, you did everything. You wrapped it up in ball, that plan is approved. It's now in the final stage. Does that make sense?
Well, is that something that needs to be done at a planning commission official meeting, or is that more of a work session?
It needs to have
Right.
official action, so we would have to have it be an official.
So if I understand you correctly. I don't know if I do.
He's like,
Because
let me think
it's-
about it for a minute.
I think we've all considered preliminary approval more complete than it really is. Preliminary approval is this, that's got this, and this, and they're missing this. It's
Here's
just
our
their first-
conditions.
It's
Here
their
you
first step in the, I don't know, I want to say legislative process, but basically that.
Nothing glaringly wrong.
There's nothing
Or if there
glaringly
are,
wrong.
We identify them and say, go fix
But
it.
it won't have all the landscape probably done. It won't probably have all the nitty gritty stuff done.
And that's the hard part.
Well, but you're just giving a preliminary approval. You're not giving a final, recommending final approval. You're just giving a preliminary.
Yeah, but by the time you get to that, they don't have that authority anymore.
We
And
can't
that's-
make any recommendations for
Yeah.
changes. We can't even give any input on, hey,
Why-
you did the traffic
Because
study.
it's all administrative. That's what they're doing right now.
If you don't approve the site plan at that point,
It goes
it's
to
not
staff.
approved.
Yeah.
No,
It
so
goes back to the planning.
It goes
commission.
right back to planning.
Planning commission for recommending final approval. And they can say no and add more stipulations.
So that's when the developer gets ticked off at us.
Because we spent all this money and now we're on.
We're the ones that were saying that.
They changed it right on the napkin.
We're gonna have to be, it depends on what we're considering final. If you want final to have everything, that's the decision we have to make. That's what Dave was asking. When do you want it to come to preliminary? Are we saying preliminary is just preliminary, it's like 80%? Then that's what we have to recognize that, and the developer has to recognize that, and it's open book. But they haven't gone through 5 renditions to get it. Right now, we're expecting it to be basically 100% at preliminary.
Right.
And that's when they say, and now you're asking me to change it more? But if you're not expecting it to be 100%, then they still have others, they know they got steps to do. I'm okay with that. I really am. It's the fact that right now they're going through 6 renditions to get it to preliminary.
And then they bring it to us and then they're
And
really
then-
mad because.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and then if we say no, then they're like, you guys were gonna
Just wasted our time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we're City, because you gave us the impression that this was.
We're good to go.
Yeah, but the responsibility isn't to the developers. I'm sorry, it's not. And
Staff time.
And I understand that part of it, but when they come on here and start telling us that, it's $10,000 every time they have to change a plan. Number one, that's bull crap, because I've worked at the developer's office and have seen the guy sitting over there on the desk that's doing it on ICAD. Second one, it doesn't matter because all of that is an expense that they get a tax reduction off later on, because it is part of the work of doing business. So I think a lot of times we give these guys just so much, and we're building a process around what their needs are instead of the people's.
Well, I think.
And I think that when we're talking about the city council and the PC, we should really be looking at when their power to get involved and represent the citizens is. And if that means that they only need a small portion to be able to see the preliminary, I don't care what goes in the bucket. I'm talking about, this is all they need to be able to give feedback on and to be able to be productive. I think that is where we need to be looking at it. yes, they may not have a dozen approvals, but like I said, I personally don't believe that your job is to do catch up for these guys,
No, I.
you know, so,
And I mean, I think staff, they do a wonderful job.
yes.
And what I'm thinking here, going back to your question, Dave, about, you know, the two memos. I think, I like the idea of the two memos. One, you know, you have the first review, you send it back to them, and then the second memo to us could be, this plan is not ready. Here's our issues, but they're coming to you. Here are some things to discuss. Feel free to share any other things you need to discuss. And by the way, you don't have to approve them.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we feel, I don't know, pressured or obligated is the right word to send something through the process.
Mhm.
Not be the hinge.
Yeah.
The stop.
And I think if, you know, if we had a clear direction from staff, because again, I rely heavily on you. And, you know, if it comes to us and it's, you know, there's still 50% or 70% that needs to be done, you know, we should be able to confidently say, you know what, we're not even going to consider this. We know you're on the agenda, but you're not ready. Come back. Staff has
Based
already.
on what's
told
in the
you.
packet,
Yeah, you can continue the item, right? You can say, you're not ready, we're gonna continue it until you fix these items, right? And then, but you have that authority at any point to say.
I would like to be reminded.
Yeah.
You add that to the memo, remind
I
Jerry.
think
Remind Gary.
You should tell the developer that, that, hey, just so you know, we're gonna send this too, but based on this, and we're gonna be recommending that they don't consider it until these things are done.
Well, and it's important to remember, you can deny a final plat. You can say, or you can deny a preliminary plat, and you say, no. No.
You can deny
But-
final.
You can
No.
recommend denial final, or you can deny site plan, or
Well, but for them to be able to deny a preliminary or not allow, like,
There has to be
deny
a
a,
reason
there has to
for
be
it.
a
It can't
reason.
just be a
They can't
personal-
just say
It can't
no.
be arbitrary, it can't be capricious. it
So
can't be
yeah, I mean,
And again,
There's-
it meets code.
within law.
But again, code is not everything. That is why the general plan and you guys, I'll stop saying general plan. That's why you guys are there, because I write code and I can't write code to handle every hole. I can't do it for every situation. I can't even do it on a freaking buffer. But you guys can. And that's the thing. That's why there's humans in this that are able to say, you know what? I know what we're trying to do here and this ain't it. And this is why. And I'm more worried about these kids that are next door that have this issue on it. And yes, and if we need to go through and, like I said, bring Jamie in to see what we have to do on it, so that everybody sees what certain laws do and not, and I could be wrong, but that's fine. If I am, I'll shut up. But
One important.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, one important thing to remember about the difference between the administrative and the legislative, and it's kind of been brought up, is that a legislative decision is a policy decision by the body, and you can have whatever reasoning you want. An administrative decision has to have specific reasoning and examples in the code, right? Specific findings is the word. And that distinction is really important when it comes to the administrative approvals, because and I think that's some of the rub sometimes, and from my perspective, what I've seen from both bodies at times is, well, this is administrative, therefore I'm just rubber stamping. That's not a direct connection. That's not true. It can be an administrative approval, but if they don't have everything buttoned up, then we don't have to approve it. But it does make it harder.
Can I pause
because
for just
to describe
second?
what is not
Wait.
buttoned up.
Pause. Under what circumstance would it be coming to these people, PC, when the preliminary plan isn't actually done? Like,
Well, that's exactly the point of my question is, we have shifted in our procedure from when I first started, where planning commission saw it very, very early on with almost no changes from their initial submission, to now staff has been tasked with making sure they are buttoning up almost everything before it gets to planning commission.
And you're,
That's what we're
and
trying
that
to
was
figure out.
basically requested too. I mean, it was asked for to be more complete.
Right.
So, and you did it. I mean, you've done what you were asked, but so that's.
But it
If
is
we
also
if we go
created
too far.
quite a bit of frustration from everybody, it seems like, right? Developers are frustrated with how long it takes, and I've heard frustration about different points of that from everybody, and staff has been equally frustrated at times. But what I'm hearing is there is a general desire to have planning commission more involved earlier. Understanding, again, a plat and a plan are the two items. And the plan, including all those components, is what the planning commission has discretion over generally. And to be able to provide feedback and say, we would like it like this, or we're concerned about these things. It's still code-based, right? But it's a review early in the process, recognizing there's still a lot of work to do before it is a final package with all of the elements figured out, that then the planning commission can say, we are good with this plan. And we recommend the council approves the final plat to make it happen.
I think you're wanting the planning commission to get involved more in the concept sketch stage. And at least getting input in whatever capacity, whether it be through a meeting or, I don't know, what does it take? I mean, to go through, if you guys have your initial meeting with the developer, to have-
Just a discussion item on it.
yeah, here's a discussion item.
Because we're really asking for two different things.
Yep.
We want things buttoned up, but yet we also want.
Early input.
Exactly, and I'm trying to figure out the answer to Dave's question, the best way to make this happen for everybody.
Mhm.
So what we've got right now is basically 3 public meetings, generally. 2 of them happen at planning commission and 1 of them happens at city council. In that initial planning commission meeting, as code is written, that the planning commission is looking at the plat and the plan. They are approving the preliminary plat, saying we're generally good with this, keep working. And then providing input on the plan and saying, here's all the things we would like you to fix and get wrapped up. Then they're bringing that back to planning commission, and this is kind of that handoff I think Trevor's describing, is in that meeting, that's when there is a approval of a final plan and recommendation to the council to approve the final plat. So the council's only involved in the final stage, which typically means it should be buttoned up generally, right? And that's where I think councils feel like, well, we're generally a rubber stamp at this point because it should have been vetted. At times it felt like it hadn't been vetted and there have been concerns, right? Are you still okay with those 3 meetings or what I'm hearing, having maybe the mayor and a planning commissioner or 2 be involved at that sketch plan, that concept plan where we are providing general direction, right? They bring in an idea and we say, well, if that's your idea, you need to make sure you have a reason because it doesn't do this, or you need to make sure that you have letters from all these people, right? We walk them through all of the bucket items and tell them these are the things you need. Would having that perspective in that sketch plan meeting alleviate some of these concerns?
I'm really interested in Gary's answer because either of those options means an extra meeting.
Well. Well, there's 2 of 5.
Yeah, and this is problematic, right?
It is, and I've missed my fair share of meetings this year too, so I'm not pointing fingers, I'm also including myself in that.
I haven't missed a single meeting.
Woohoo. You have all the strengths, Julie.
And the other thing, so last year, I reached out to my fellow commissioners when I was chair to serve on the code committee. Nobody took it. And so I'm still on it, but yet I'm still missing a lot. So that's my concern, is that, you would actually have somebody at the meeting that could represent the planning commission. I think, we can change that culture as new people get brought on, it's very
Here's the
clear that,
expectation.
yeah, you have this, plus you have to serve on, one of two
Committee.
committees. And that may rotate yearly, but if you agree to that, then you have to make a strong effort.
Do we make it a responsibility of the chair and the vice chair? You have to take a committee position as well, just so that way it just becomes a higher level of responsibility for that year,
Not a bad idea.
Is that
Sure,
gonna,
PC.
is that gonna help our
You guys
chances
have-
of getting people to, because obviously we do have, this is a plug out to the public. We do have a position that is open, because Commissioner Walton's term has come to an end and he's not able to reapply. So we've got a spot opening up. And, for people that sit and get frustrated sometimes probably with the whole back and forth, we can only do what we can do. Well, guess what, citizens? You have a very important role to still play. Just because you filled out a survey and we've got the general plan, your public comment and your input on these development plans and plats and proposals really does have an impact. And as much as, public clamor and all that stuff, we have to be careful of it. It still is important. And I think that's another facet, because I do think they bring to light situations and things that maybe we haven't considered for developments and things that we need to be aware of, rezones, things like that. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I also want to be very respectful of everybody's times, because we all have a lot of things that we're doing,
And I do like efficient.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're pretty efficient, but it's gotten a lot better.
I will say the sketch plan, I am welcome, I love having whoever wants to be in those, But I think anybody who's in those needs to recognize that's a very
Rough,
basic,
rough.
kind of rough sketch
Okay.
of what's happening, right? And things,
Most projects die in that concept stage. They don't even get to.
Where places go to die.
so much.
It's
more
pretty
basic
development
stuff.
go to die.
Sometimes we'll have a sketch plan meeting and we won't hear again for next, 6 months, and they're like, we'll try again. And, or sometimes we just don't hear it at all, so there is that balance,
What
right?
about just because there are a lot of those, what about involving whoever, the planning commission, the mayor, whatever, in the latter stages of those reviews, as you get into those, after the first final letter, and they are proceeding down the road of the development versus.
We have a preliminary
Good
meeting.
idea. If I hear you correctly, having staff do the initial submission review, sending a memo to the developer saying fix whatever. On that next one, having a member of the city council also provide a review memo to the planning commission. Is that what I'm hearing? Like a review?
No.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking,
Not necessarily a memo.
I was thinking having someone from the planning commission be involved in the next review. Or you could even send it out to them to make comments back to the sketch plan people. Just however you want to. No, I'm not, because I wouldn't want to speak as a council member. I wouldn't feel comfortable.
No.
on this review.
No.
I think we have to be careful on.
Could Joe and I would love to do that,
Right.
but
Not your job.
not my job.
That's what I just
Yeah,
want to
no, no,
clarify.
that was not my.
What that meant.
So typically in the sketch stage, we only have one meeting with them. And we give them all of the notes. These code sections you have to worry about. These city standards you have to worry about. These conditions you have to worry about. You need to look up the easements, right? So it's very broad. It's a lot of just notes that we kind of talk about in the meeting, and then we give them all the notes and say, when you make your preliminary, these are all the things you have to worry about.
So, what value would one of us do an add to a meeting like that? Because as you're explaining it that way, I'm thinking, there's really no reason for us to be a part of that meeting.
That's why I'm wondering if we have in the preliminary bucket, in that stage, if we had that very first meeting where you knew everything was preliminary, everything, like you are not granting license to do anything. This is just your time to review and have that workshop discussion. it could be a work session with them at that point. We're workshopping it and talking.
Then, like I said, can you just not put it on there as a discussion item? It hits once and then goes, I mean, we talked about that with other large budget items. It could be the same with planning commission before they do it. Just have a discussion item on it. at
That's
early
what I'm
stages.
saying. Bring it
And
to
it's
them.
not even, you don't even have to.
No,
you don't even
there's
have to
no
vote on
action
it.
on it at all.
It's
It's just
purely
brought to
discussion.
them as a discussion item,
I like that.
and the developer knows that from there, now he's got their input. Now he can spend the money if he wants to.
If
to
it's
bring
a
it to
one-lot
fruition.
subdivision, you can probably bypass that step, I would think.
Well, I think we have in our code, don't we, where if it's like a single lot or three?
Preliminary.
But you know, what I mean.
In the
if it's not-
same
If it's not,
meeting.
if it's a no-brainer type, you don't need to waste a month's time.
Just a minor stuff.
That's, I think, the question that a developer will raise initially. So if you're telling me that I have to go to planning commission now for a discussion.
But
Then I have another month.
It wouldn't have been a big deal on the larger ones, because they're, otherwise it's just getting kicked back to them anyway.
They have a
Yeah.
lot to work on typically.
Right.
I think it really, I don't know if we task you with that, of making the determination of, you know, because of the size or the complexity of this project,
Right,
we need to have a discussion,
Right.
where, no, this is so simple, we can just.
just pushes, yeah.
Exactly.
One thing that I would suggest or remind is, and we really brought it up, the idea of you can always continue. We've had a back and forth with the council about, do we bring every item as an action? So if you are comfortable, you can, because if we bring it as a discussion.
It has to go to the next meeting
Then
in
you
order to
actually
actually.
wait to do an action.
No.
I would like, well, speaking, if it's a more complex thing, I would really like to keep it as a discussion,
Mhm.
because again, there's so much
They're
pressure
pushy.
and expectation,
Mhm.
and, you know, I mean, the discussion may be.
It's the expectation of the developer.
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
It could be similar to, this is an example that happened just now, like just this last couple of weeks. So I was working on the draft overlay zone, right? And I just was like, I don't know if this is ready just to be an ordinance that they make a recommendation on. I feel like they need to have another discussion. So what I did is I called up Jeremy, said, what would you like it to be? Would you like me to public notice and have a public notice and consider the ordinance, or would you like another work session to draft something and then move that on to? It could be something similar. I could call Jeremy or whoever's the chair and say, this is development that potentially could go forward. These are kind of the pitfalls. We would recommend a discussion. What do you feel it needs? Or do you want to just kind of have that be the chair's?
Well, doesn't the chair set the agenda anyway? I think it's a great idea.
I agree. I concur.
I just got the agenda, so, okay. thanks.
I called you.
Well, that- Hold on.
No, I like
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm doing a really good job at it.
I am rocking the chair position.
But one thing to keep in mind, though, if any of that sketch goes to you guys, the public's going to start there with their suggestions.
Okay.
So,
And I think that's great.
yeah,
I
It-
welcome it.
it gives that opportunity for them to actually get involved. You were saying, you know, you would like more people involved. Well, quite honestly, they're not involved right now because they come and talk. Well, no, they come and talk and it just gets blown off. I'm serious. Just the same frustrations. No, hang on. The same frustrations that you guys have, they have. They come in, they give they speak, they talk, they say exactly what's on their mind. And nobody even says anything back to them. It's like, thanks for your comment. And then rarely is there anything that we can do for them. I mean, it's not like you guys are saying, forget them. No, it's at the different stages. Y'all don't have that kind of control. It's administrative, and then they blame you guys and want to rip on you. And
I haven't
so-
had a nasty phone call for about a year and a half.
you've blocked my number.
I did.
I got a new phone number, so you won't be able to block this one.
They're like, I gotta update that.
He did.
No, we didn't.
He said, he said, don't give this to the mayor.
It's like, we talk about- we all be-
Everybody arranged, and I've got one that's just got a number. And I'm thinking,
I keep saying, this is Joel.
and it's a different number. but I thought Joan got it. I just figured that out the other day.
About when public comment really matters and can be taken under consideration for decisions. The state legislature is actually having conversations.
Of course they are.
Clarify that.
What are they saying?
Well, the Utah League of
Oh.
Cities and Towns is involved. And it's actually being drafted by Utah League staff. But the idea is to put public comment where it actually can be used.
And
To
matters.
eliminate that confusion, right? Because if a member of the public comes and says, this is bad for all these reasons, but it's an administrative item and it doesn't matter, then that breeds frustration from everybody.
That should be handled locally.
Yep, agree.
Yeah, because they also want to put a time limit on it, saying that it has to be for 30 minutes, whether there's somebody there or not.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
Oh, let's bring popcorn.
Wait, who's,
that's the state. That's that bill. It actually says that, so.
Paul, can you?
Some of that's due to the virtual.
Uh-huh.
Paul's like,
But they're trying to leave it open for a set period, so anybody who's later,
what bill is
I
it?
know, just saying.
Citizen filibuster. Just kidding.
Who's literally to write that in last night? Wow. Filibuster.
That is the name of my next bill.
Does it have a number on it yet? Okay.
No. You know what? They don't even have half of them written. I'm sorry, but they go to session in like a month and most of them are.
They're
still
not, they're
written.
not even written. They're still in draft
So
form.
aggravating. That's I detoured.
For the legislature.
Oh, there's so many changes. We can all be changing today.
I'm taking notes of what we discussed, so can we kind of just
Wrap it up.
Yes or no with this process? Okay, so sketch plan staff. Done those, okay. Then a second follow-up meeting, maybe a PC involved, you're saying you don't need to be,
I think it depends on how big of a development it is, really.
Yep. If it's just a simple little one,
Second sketch
discussion.
plan.
well, a follow-up from the sketch plan, there's,
It's like a discussion item.
There was a no to the sketch plan meeting, but they put it as a discussion.
Discussion.
so instead of the second follow-up, bring proposal to PC as a discussion item. So I can next that one. Okay, that was my next one. And then send the complete pack, this is where I want to make sure I'm getting this right. So we have our different buckets. So they've discussed this, and then are we going to have the complete bucket from all the sketch? Gosh, I wish I had those set.
Site plans, architectural and landscaping.
That all has to be there before preliminary,
Mhm.
No, final,
final.
right?
So, okay,
Preliminary.
Completed for final approval.
that's in the preliminary stage. If it's not, do we need all of that?
All of
in-
it.
To be in preliminary.
So that the planning commission can review and provide input.
Okay,
Two different things,
It's that
Okay.
hand.
black and one for the plan improvement.
okay,
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, two other thoughts. And if I'm missing a step. What's the next step? Because I haven't written that one down yet.
Final.
It's the
City
final-
council.
Then it goes to final.
It's the,
So as far as what we would like to see happen, is there another
Mhm.
step that we need to happen?
Because after it's the
Right.
PC discussion item, then it's preliminary. And then final PC and then construction, right?
No,
To keep the
city.
bucket analogy
City
flowing.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess.
City
Okay.
Okay, okay, so then, two, items of feedback maybe. Lisa, I believe, if you sent it to us, she gives us the wording for options for each agenda item. Approve, deny, amend, continue, whatnot. That could be very beneficial for the planning commission to have that. So I would love to have them.
Trevor's been,
Okay.
that's a new thing that
Perfect.
started, that's
Okay.
been helpful.
And then also educate the developer. I like when, council.
Woman.
Albert said, we educate the public, but we really need to be educating the developer, which I know staff does, but maybe
Mhm.
a little more from the PC end too, and saying, hey, this is where we're at in the stage. That doesn't mean that tonight this is gonna happen for you.
Mhm.
We're gonna talk about it, but that doesn't mean you're getting approval tonight. So they have clear expectations of that.
Well, and I think that's where having it as a discussion item helps set that. expectation.
Exactly.
But we should know that even if it is an action item, we have that opportunity to.
That's all I had. I'm not missing anything with
No.
our proposed new procedure. The staff, good with that?
And he's trying to concise this meeting.
I am.
Are we 3/4 of a mile through?
We got 8 minutes.
3/4 of a mile.
So
3/4 of a mile, we're going a mile, and we're
Just a
3/4 of a mile there.
Gotcha.
just a question on this, does that handle, agreements also?
Development agreements
Development
are our
agreements?
city council.
So they don't get involved in it
We
at
do
all?
not.
Yes, they do have a role in development. So,
Okay,
Saying
sorry.
that we want one.
yeah, so they get
Oh,
a
that's
chance
true.
to weigh in.
That
on
is true.
development. So
I think this is right.
development agreement throws a link into it because what a development agreement does, if it's a legislative development agreement, it basically messes up the very first bucket, right? So our first bucket is the zoning code and the general plan and all of that. A development agreement upsets that whole first bucket.
No, that's not right.
So first we need to get that first bucket in order before they can even go through that. Now, that doesn't mean that the development agreement has to be approved before they go through, but we have to have a working document of what the code would be, because it's basically site specific zoning.
Okay, so in the event that a developer says, I would love to do a development agreement on this, or staff says, in your sketch plan meeting, this may have to have a development agreement. What should our process be then? Do we want to involve a member of the PC and the council in that discussion from the beginning?
Yeah, so right now, what we've done typically is something does not meet code, and they really want to go for that. Then we ask the mayor if he wants that on a city council meeting, to see if that's gonna be something that we even wanna turn the bucket over, right? And if that is something that, then I agree, I think having planning commission and city council recommendations, at least one of them on that committee is really helpful. Because then we have a good guidepost of like, okay, I can kind of think for the whole council right now, I'm thinking this is what we're all gonna feel comfortable with. Obviously, that won't be known until the very end when you get to the final bucket, but we can kind of start with that. Does that make sense?
So, yes, so if, someone comes in as, Julia. Julie, it was nice, it wasn't me.
Okay.
She mentioned it's their, they have the right to come before the council. So if someone comes in and says, I'm just looking for a head nod, all this, then really, I'm just wondering if our procedure should say, okay, you want to come here, you can present this to us, but our procedure for a development agreement is this.
And that's something
Line it
that
out.
we can have in code. Like, we don't have any provisions in our code of how to handle development agreements. And that would be a consultant section for staff, is like, this is how we do about development.
Okay, code committee, make it so.
City,
That'll be our next conversation.
You got 5 minutes.
How does it work for conditional use permits too? Because I know that's one thing, like, does
that's on code committee right now.
code committee right now is conditional use permits? Okay.
Like,
Yeah. our
it was supposed to be today.
of that is
Okay.
difficult.
Joel took a very long time.
I'm talkative.
But that is something that planning commission, kind of like with development agreements, we have a weigh-in point. And is that weigh-in point first bucket upset?
It is.
No.
Second,
Or is it
a
second bucket?
conditional use, depending on the use, right? If it's a commercial conditional use, then it is, it goes through the planning commission to the city council. But if it's a residential conditional use, then it's just a planning commission.
Okay, so it's depending upon if it's commercial versus residential,
it's commercial, isn't it an
different
acre?
bucket. Okay.
If it's under an acre, it's planning commission for commercial, over an acre. goes
And then
to
the
council.
conditional uses, set conditions that are within our code, right? We have a range of these are the conditions we can set. and-
Because I will admit, those have always confused me in terms of when do we get to weigh in, when do
Well,
we get to
I
have
think the
input,
code is greatly
Yes.
lacking.
but it's coming, so
It's coming.
we will get to discuss.
The conditional use permit is initially reviewed in the preliminary stage.
Okay.
And planning commission will review that.
Claire's anxious. Are we ready to go?
Let's just mayor's anxious.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
So Joel brought up a very important thing earlier, which I think dovetails to the next item.
Joel's nodding.
Another item we got?
On the bottom of the.
And that's the idea about when any project is going through this process, and we recognize a deficiency in code, or even the desire to discuss it, to see if there's a deficiency, what is our process for that? Because right now, we've got a code committee that has kind of become the working group of code
Kind of.
where, for land use, and has been tasked other things at times. It was initially established to just do Title 10 land use items, whereas Planning Commission is the land use authority and kind of is established to be the working group for land use code, although it hasn't acted like that in the past. So what is the desired interaction between the code committee and the planning commission? And when we recognize a deficiency or a desire for land use specific code, not any other code, but land use specific code, how do we want to go about that? Who do we want to look at
Mayor, who do you want to look at it?
PR committee.
I think there are items in that code committee that the committee can be working on. But I think that anything that pops up from meetings that you've had or people you've talked to, and you think that's a concern with the code, then that should come from planning commission to the code committee. Okay, we want you to work on this, and that can
That
also,
segues back to the last planning commission though. So is that the proper way to do it? Because it was debated back and forth.
We didn't know.
When, if they see a problem in code.
I think it should come from them
So-
to the code committee.
It doesn't have to get directed from the city council for them to go work on that.
No.
correct?
Yeah, they should do it.
They
So-
should do it.
So I mean, I didn't know the answer to the question either. I think. Gary
But I
brought
think
it
that
up,
was,
but-
it was Commissioner Davis, and again, it's that
Yeah.
proactive approach, you know, in terms of should we be reviewing sections of code, things that have maybe come up, deficiencies? We're not gonna know every
I
single
don't
one
think-
that's in there,
I don't
so
think
it's not
you-
like we're gonna be flooding
You're
the
not.
code committee.
And a lot of it's
But-
gonna be items that come to you and you say, oh, ding,
Whoa,
ding, ding,
this
something's
doesn't
gotta
look
be
like
done.
things been
Code
tested.
committee, jump on this.
So in that thing, I like having the code committee and having them at least kind of start to formulate an idea and then come to us. And if we have to have a couple of discussions about it, that's okay. But I think if we were to have those discussions, our meetings would get so long.
Yeah, I was just gonna actually touch on that. That's initially actually part of the reason code committee got created was because for planning commission, I mean, obviously it was in a heavy development phase anyway, but it was like, how in the world are we gonna tackle this? Can you guys like break it down? And it wasn't necessarily like, well, we don't want just staff working on it. We want the perspective of the PCMCC to bring a smaller, like, you guys go like untangle the stupid Christmas lights and then bring it to us and we'll check it, you know? So that was the intention really, when we created code committee was,
And I think it's working.
yeah, I don't have a
But I
problem
think
with it.
Answer, and Jeremy's question was, yes, you can bring them up. but-
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
now
a
we're
great
in the
idea.
process, so.
Well,
Well,
and
you
it's,
guys-
And when we say code committee, are we talking? Yeah,
Haley and
okay.
And Joel
There you
and-
go.
but
Email.
that's just it
Gary
though.
and-
It's something that I've brought up a couple of times is that if we get a backlog of actual things we need to do, I mean, really, holes in our development process are huge. We budget out for a contractor to come in and help us write the code.
Yeah, how do you prioritize if you've got?
Well, that's, that's,
Well,
Yeah.
And that really, that's the one thing that I've seen with the code committee that we struggle with
Yeah.
is prioritizing. Because there's always
Yeah.
something coming up the pipeline and we're trying to, you know, we're not looking out or forward thinking, we're just thinking, oh.
It's reactionary.
We're reaction-
versus Proactive.
And that's the only,
Yeah.
and I don't know if there's a good way to.
I don't know if it is either, because you're gonna always have that.
Yeah.
well, and that's just it, is that a lot of it is going to be a reaction, especially if it's
Yes.
going to be coming from you guys. But at the same time, as soon as you hit some of the questions that I've heard Julie say, really should have just been able to say, you know what, okay, we need to actually fix code then that says this is how we're going to handle this situation. Because yeah, just because we don't have it in there right now, we should. And then we've brought it up here and the council has had a chance to prioritize it, and that's what we've gone off of. So we just need to keep that prioritization up.
Yeah, I think we just adapt and react and readapt.
And
adapt.
Overcome.
There you go.
Do because of the heavy lift for the code committee, because what I just heard was basically all land use code needs to go to the working group code committee first. That becomes a burden. Is that something that we need to have rotate? I mean, you
Yes.
described that to try to make it happen, but
And frankly, Commissioner,
David?
no, Trevor.
Taylor.
Taylor, sorry, yeah.
He's leaving. And so we're losing a member of the code committee,
But
so.
he was an extremely important member, especially during those early days. And after my mom passed away, I wasn't involved much, but the work that you all did, that was pretty heavy. And I think also it could use some fresh perspective.
How often does code committee meet? I don't even know.
Tuesday.
So
Twice a
twice a
month.
month. So is
Usually
it something that
Tuesdays.
we rotate members? Is that beneficial from a planning commission standpoint?
I feel like
Is it keep the same person for
we tend to build,
a period of
I
time?
mean, we tend to discuss things over a course of a couple months. I mean, it takes us, I mean, we're lucky if we get a couple months. I mean, some of these you're tackling for a long time. So it's kind of hard if you're switching out a lot, because
I would say at least a year,
I think a year.
maybe even 2 years.
I mean, that chair, vice chair might not be a bad idea.
I like.
I mean, we've got to rotate that every year anyways.
Well,
Yeah.
because then your vice chair, well, I shouldn't say that, I was gonna say your vice chair becomes chair and doesn't do that.
No, she,
Never mind.
he or she,
Never
thank
mind,
you.
I'm not even sure how it actually works, because I got nominated for the vice chair and I was like, wait, what? Nobody talked to me about this. All right, fine, let's do this.
So,
That would be a really good thing. to do.
Angie has something to say.
I do, thank you. But I want to ask Dave and I want to ask the mayor, is that our most efficient use of our time is to have code committee do all of that code review, or should some of it just originate and the chair should put it on the agenda that we're going to review this code?
This section of code,
This section of code we identified last meeting, we need to address, let's do it now.
is that a
To
more
me,
proactive
that seems
approach?
A little bit more proper, it's streamlined and it goes from the planning commission, staff reviews it and it sends to council, we're skipping a step.
So the one thing with code committee is we have a lawyer.
Yeah, so one thing that I think might be helpful is something that code committee does is every week we review, well, not every week, but we review our priority. Like, we just bumped a bunch of things, like we sent something to plant or to public safety, and we sent something to PR, and like, we're constantly like, oh, that can go to these people. And I think we could probably do the same thing with PC and be like, you know what, I feel like planning commission could have a discussion on that and work on that. And then that will be a meeting that Jamie will be like, hey, they're gonna be talking about this, make sure you're there.
And especially,
But some of them are like, oh yeah, let's update 2 words in that and get that fixed. And then it's like, that's a
Well,
no-brainer.
yeah, so then that's what I'm saying, like, could you not come into an agreement and say, this code needs to have these things addressed, and we like this A, B, C, D. Hey, Jamie, does this look great? Yep, that looks great. Here's
Well,
some
I think
language.
that's what I'm trying to say is sometimes we think it's a really quick fix
It's
and
not.
then it's not. Like Jamie gets in there and was like, well, you need to be thinking about this and this and this. And Trevor's like, and there's this and this.
we
And
spent
we're
an
like,
hour talking about food
yeah,
trucks.
it's true. An hour on food trucks. And then it's not necessarily, I don't feel like we're not trying to be like inefficient. It's just, there's
Where the
kind of a lot.
goes.
Yeah, kind of a lot to consider, because you're trying to plan for what might happen and what hasn't happened and what isn't happening.
So I guess my question would be, knowing that there may be things that we think are simple fix that are not, could we still do the simple fix until it goes back to code committee and say, hey, it's just like our parking or whatever it was, that we were like, this is the simplest thing. Why can't we just say we want this amount of parking, but then code committee, no, and no, not to anyone, but it went around and around and around, and I'm like, can't we just say 5 spots is better than 4 for right now? Get that in the code and then go back and have that discussion if we need to, or is the fear that it will never go back to discussion?
I think it just, so being involved, South Weaver is unique in that it has that really active committee structure, right? And as I've been involved and seen that, I think there are times that it's a very efficient process, and there are times that it feels almost like Lucy in the Chocolate Factory, right? Where we're trying to just do as much as we can, but we're not being very efficient and maybe we're missing something. or we're diving too deep into something. I think one thing that helps is knowing the problem to solve, right? What is the problem we are trying to solve with this? Because sometimes it's like, fix this code, and then we all aren't united on that problem solved. So I think the direction from the planning commission or city council on these, this is the problem we want to solve. Go solve that problem can help. Not saying it's easy, but I think it has been working pretty well. With the code committee, with planning commission, and we just want to make sure that planning commission isn't directing staff time when they're not supposed to direct staff time, like, or vice versa, right? Or they're directing a committee that council's like, no, that's
We want them
we
focused
want them to
here.
focus on that, right? So I think if we had, what problems are we trying to solve, and what strategic plan are we trying to implement with the code committee, that's really up on that side.
Because the thing is, I mean, with the five of us, one of us could raise an issue with code. And the rest of us not think it's an
Be
issue,
like, it's not a
But-
problem, we're fine.
but yet they, there's an issue, and so if it gets thrown to the code committee, it's like, yeah, this is an issue.
Yeah, but I feel like you guys are kind of in a way the gatekeepers of the code, because you're gonna be the first ones that are gonna see something
Yeah.
and be like, oh, we can't we can't say no to that. Oh, that's not in our code. Like, that's you guys, you're the gatekeepers. So it's really appropriate, I think, that it would be coming from you.
But also, staff helps us to recognize.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, the planning commission is going to recommend any land use code change to the city council. The question is, if it's deep enough or hairy enough, do they want a working group to be involved in it? And that's kind of the code. At the same time, all committees need direction from the council instead of planning commission, and so I think that's the rub a little bit. So maybe it's as easy as if you run into code during this development process, that the planning commission says, yeah, we got this, right? It's a simple one that says, we think that it's just a matter of changing that number or this number or whatnot. Then staff can go and draft that and bring it straight back to the planning commission. But if it's a hairy one, and say, maybe that's something that needs to go to the
So-
code committee to vet a little bit before going back to the planning.
So I have a question. This is a work session, so we can't really make a decision. Are you asking, does the council need to weigh on that officially?
This is not a resolution or an ordinance or whatnot. This is just kind of.
Like, I mean, but I'm just,
You can give direction on how
Okay.
you want it.
so if you have 3 council members say, yeah, PC, we're good with that, that's direction from the council. Yeah? I'm good with that.
In the past, when planning commission seen issues, when they dealt with a development, they will make that recommendation with their recommendation to the council. We recommend review, approve, the final subdivision plat, but we also recommend that we work on
Touch on this.
X code to fix that code, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe it's just a direction from the council at that point to say, great, planning commission fix it, great, the planning committee fix it. And then I think we've talked about that, but that's kind of how we've done it on sometimes.
And I think also as you're selecting PC members, I mean, some of us are better than others at noticing those things. Julie and Taylor are awesome. I mean, they know the code back and forth, they recognize this, and me, not so much. I mean, I read the code and I go to sleep. That's really- but I think having that balance of someone who has kind of that background or that mindset to be able to read and understand the code, they can see those things where if you have 5 with me, there wouldn't be many of those things that would come up unless Trevor knows. And not saying you need 5 lawyers.
No, I know
Like a
exactly. what
variety
you-
of disciplines.
Yeah,
So is it in agreement then that planning commission will recommend to the council when they see deficiencies, and council will then direct whether that goes to code committee or planning commission?
See,
And if planning commission sees something easy, then we can just.
Does planning commission just tell Blair, and Blair can tell us, and we can do that? Or does planning commission need to come to us?
Is it to be an official agenda item?
Just be as a
Approved.
communication item. or-
Okay, Blair.
Come on,
Well,
and me and the
One of
mayor.
the roles
if,
of-
if you look at the, process map that we actually created that did all of this, all you have to do is submit it. So you submit it, then it goes onto a list and it gets reviewed. It doesn't make a formal process for it. It's just, nobody's been following the process yet.
Or is the submitting it just a minute entry?
Right now, it's an email.
An
Right now, it's an email.
An email to Trevor, an email to Lisa.
Email,
an
yeah,
to-
email, it goes, supposed to go email to Trevor and to the chairman. It goes into the tracking software that we have, and it gets put over there, and then it gets prioritized and gets moved into the areas. I mean, we actually already went through all of this.
So can
So-
we just say in the meeting, Trevor,
Trevor,
raise this?
Well, I guess the point.
Or email it.
For me,
The thing is, you need a email, because although he'll have that, we need specific information on, okay, this is how it really needs to be. And a lot of that takes the perspective of the person who just ran
The
into it.
minutes should capture that.
and that could also be something that the chair after the
That should
meeting,
be yeah.
very easily could send the email, based on the discussion from this meeting, we want this section of code, you know, we're requesting.
So the chair will send that email to the entire city council, how does?
That's what we don't know, like, this is a whole new process that I'm hearing about, so.
that's my.
Who does it
It
go to?
doesn't need it.
Organization. And as you describe it, Joel, that it ends up being the code committee that's prioritizing. it
No,
rather than
The code committee, and the last time we did this, we took a list of what the code committee thought were going to be the like top 10, 15 items out of everything. Brought it to the city council, and then the city council voted and said, here's the order we want them to be worked. And that's what we did.
Was there a second stage in terms of, hey, this is something that needs to be code committee, or this is something that PC could do very quickly?
No.
Could there be that second level? And
Yeah,
then
We
we've
had
got
that
more
flow
chambers.
chart,
Mm.
but we discussed it and we never went much further with it, but it was
So-
supposed to come to council, or when was that supposed to go?
That's the question is all code requests, regardless of where they're the source, supposed to just go to the code committee through that request? Or is it a strategic directive from the city council on prioritization?
The council should make that decision.
I think Dave said it was the way PC, the city council, to the committee. Is the way it probably should be.
So the council then hears from planning commission that there's an issue, and the council can then direct whether or not that's a high priority or where that.
And where it should
Which
go.
means the committee priority list needs to be something that the council can see regularly.
Well, and maybe even planning commission development, I didn't even know there was a priority list of code. And sections that are being worked on.
It's really
Because we
something.
don't have any, have you seen anything?
Gary's on it.
Oh, that's, he's like, I know.
He's seen it. He knows it.
Maybe one chairman should ask for reports.
Yeah.
Being on the being vice chair, I went into our, like, what's the
Will it come from
automatically being enrolled in that position?
city council? So
Because I'm vice chair,
Yeah.
so I might,
Damn it. we
Yeah,
could set
that's just
aside
one of the responsibilities,
City
you gotta do it,
And we would just.
I like how they did. It's your bylaw.
Take
it's our bylaw.
or go back.
And they're coming up again.
Are they coming up again?
Panel.
Actually make him part of it.
So maybe you need to have in there our roles and responsibilities added to the chair and the vice chair.
I tried that a couple of years ago,
No.
and
I don't know how.
it was all done.
Taking the role like jobs and stuff, but I think nowadays with Zoom communications, like, you have to be there in person, and you dial in, you know, and at least be,
For them.
you know,
Yeah, we even have like a really nifty camera where you can see the whole room in a circle.
and they just meet here.
Code committee.
Okay.
And then
Yeah, the time commitment is
Haley will bring it up in her report.
problematic at times based on what they do.
Yeah.
Then. I don't know.
That's all we've got, Mayor, from staff.
Okay,
Bada bing, bada boom. Is
we're done.
that how you say it?
Bada bing.
Sounded good to me.
Pass the over. Yeah.
Mayor, I make a motion, we adjourn?
I was just- Okay, we need a second.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Turn it off.
You know.